announcements. If I'm forgetting anything, please let me know. I wanted to introduce then our special speaker. Cliff Radel has been an inspiration to us all. His journalism over the years, we have all appreciated and read him regularly. He is a local news columnist with the Cincinnati Enquirer. And he took that job in 1995, but since then he's been named the best columnist in the state of Ohio by the Press Club of Cleveland. And that's a very prestigious honor. And also the Ohio Society of Professional Journalists, the Greater Cincinnati Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, and the Associated Press of Ohio, and also Gannett Newspaper. So he's racked up a lot of these awards, and we're so proud of them too. He's the author of 2 books, and you know, I didn't remember knowing this until I read his bio, but I'm going to try to go out and get those books. I hope they're still online or somewhere. The first edition of Cincinnati Moments, a celebration of photographs from the Cincinnati Enquirer, and that was published in 1999. And then the Big Red Machine edition, probably some of you've got that, of Cincinnati Moments, and published in 2000. Also, and I found this interesting, he was the Enquirer's popular music critic for 19 seasons. So I guess you were covering Party in the Park and all those great Cincinnati events that occur. He's a native West Sider, and so his father, his ancestors helped settle Westwood. They worked on the Union Terminal and joined his German ancestors who put in a good day's work and never put on airs. So that sounds like some of us, doesn't it? Named a distinguished graduate of the University of Cincinnati, received his bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in social psychology, and has completed coursework for his PhD. In April 2014, he was inducted into the University of Cincinnati Journalism Hall of Fame, and his work also has appeared in the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, and the Washington Post. And he and his wife, Deb, still live there in Westwood and the West Side. So please help me welcome Cliff Radel.
Holy cow, with an introduction like that, I might as well just sit down. Who is this guy she was talking about? Thank you very much, Betsy. It's very nice. I didn't unzip and get my notes out, so you'll have to bear with me. All right. And this is very, very nice. This is so nice. I was going to do show and tell and be like in the 19th century. And Steve and Betsy, of course, are in the 21st century, so I'm in awe of all that. It's very nice to be here with people who are historically inclined. I happen to be married to a woman who is just that. She's a historical researcher, and she's doing family tree work right now, even as we speak. And she's one of the reasons I'm here, talking about these beautiful works of art. There they are, boxed up in 1974. These murals. She's one of the reasons I'm here, because she did much of the grunt work and dogged research to find out who these men are on these murals when I embarked on this project. And without her, I'd be a lost ball in the weeds. Another reason I'm here is because of a man who first saved these murals back in 1932. And his name was Henry Matson Waite. He was the engineer in charge of building the terminal. And the third reason I'm here is because of my big mouth. And before I go any further, I should say that I will utter those words that every audience loves to hear. I will be brief. Then again, I may be lying. I should say that I've had a pretty much lifelong love of this glorious building and these murals, and have been fascinated by them. And my earliest memories go back to when I had a great uncle Bill, and he lived in New Jersey, and every summer he would come in to visit my grandmother. And Bill did not drive, and he refused to fly. So he took the train, and so we met Uncle Bill at Union Terminal every summer. And Uncle Bill was a very thirsty man, and there was no drinking fountain at Union Terminal that would quench his thirst. He was a man that really went straight to the bar. And one summer, my grandfather, who was dispatched to pick him up, made the mistake of not being there early. So Bill had a couple hours to kill and quite a few jiggers of alcohol as well. So when my grandfather finally got there, he said, "My gosh," he told my grandma, "I had to practically pour him into the car. So this is not going to happen again." So with that, the whole family had to troop down early, and we were there hours early before Uncle Bill's train came in. Because we just, if you hit the drinking fountain, that's fine, but nothing else. So that, needless to say, I got an education as a little kid looking at these glorious murals, and my mom would take me up and down that vast concourse that was 36 feet tall and 450 feet long and 80 feet wide to see these murals. And we'd pause at these different murals, and I was always fascinated by them, and the colors, and even the implied movement there. It looks like that ink is pouring into the barrel. Of course, I could smell the wood. These are case makers working with wood for a ballroom piano. And it was just always fascinating to me, these works that were up there. And I just became enraptured by them. I have to say, too, that years later I became involved with the terminal in that those front doors that you can't see there, where the terminal is depicted, those are brushed nickel doors. And they're one-of-a-kind doors. When they built the terminal, they didn't buy those at Lowe's or Home Depot. They built those specifically for the terminal. They're even where it says push and pull on the doors is in the typeface of Union Terminal. Union Terminal has its own typeface that was designed for the building. So lo and behold, in 1998, there was a market for those doors. The director of the terminal thought that they needed modernizing, and they needed to be removed. And I took sort of offense at that for two reasons. One is because my grandfather was a carpenter, and he helped hang those doors. Sort of personal thing with me. And the other thing is because when my dad went off to war, and when he came home from World War II, he went through those doors. And he came through those doors when he came back and into my mom's arms. I wouldn't be here with that if that hadn't happened. And so I've sort of had a definite affection for those doors. The reason why they wanted to remove them was because it was said that they couldn't be made handicap accessible. So I'm the kind of guy that I don't take no for an answer very well, or at all, for that matter. And there happens to be an architectural firm in town called Gray and Pape, and they make historic buildings handicap accessible. So I called them up, and one of the principals of the firm said, "Do you have a tape measure?" Of course, being a carpenter's son, I do have a tape measure in my car. He said, "Go over to Union Terminal and take a measurement of the door, and we'll figure it out." And he was all out of breath when he was telling me this. I said, "Did I get you in the middle of something?" He goes, "Yeah." He said, "We just came in from the airport." He said, "I have to put down my suitcase." I said, "Well, where'd you come from?" He says, "Oh, Paris." I said, "Okay, what were you doing in Paris?" He says, "Oh, we were making a building handicap accessible over there in Paris." He says, "The name of it's called the Louvre. You may have heard about it." Okay, so they know what they're doing. So I go over to Union Terminal, and I got my tape measure out, and lo and behold, what happens when you usually do things like that, but a guard shows up. And he asked me, "Well, can I help you, sir?" And I told him, I said, "I'm measuring your doors to see if they can be made handicap accessible." He says, "Can I hold your cell phone?" So, yes, you can. So we measured them. I called Gray and Pape, and he said, "You have 2 inches to spare." So the doors are still there, by the way, and they're handicap accessible. I'm just patting myself in the back. What the heck? 10 years later, I'm at a meeting of one of those interminable meetings that unfortunately journalists have to attend of township trustees and commissioners and county people, and where you're thinking to yourself, how can I slip my wrists to get out of this meeting? And it's going on and on. And this was about a planned shopping center. And one of the members of the Sierra Club was talking about the lack of merits of this shopping center and how it would destroy the landscape and everything. And he was going, I'm doing quite well, and I'm taking notes. And a woman next to me, I get an elbow from her, and she says, he's making a lot of sense, isn't he? I said, yes, he is. He really is. And I'm thinking, where's this going to go? And she goes, that's my husband. So I was so glad that I agreed. And she said, you're going to want to talk to him after the meeting. He has something to tell you, and it has nothing to do with this shopping center. I said, okay. So, in fact, he did. His name's Roland Johnson. He's right this is very moment, a very spry, 83 years old. And he is on the murals that are in the rotunda. He's the only person living from those murals. He was a babe in arms. He was 16 months old when he posed for those murals. And he had never touched his hand on the mural itself. He's not from Cincinnati. He was a babe in Brooklyn, and his mom took him to Winald Rice's studios, and that's the man who did all these murals. And he posed unknowingly. He got $4 a day, by the way, which is pretty good money in 1931. And so it didn't take much cajoling, because Roland Johnson is a climber. He climbs hills and he's a hiker, so he was all set to go. So we hooked him up and got him up on a 25-foot scissors jack and got his hand to touch his hand on the mural, which is pretty cool. And in the meantime, there's a two-man jack. So I was on the ground, the photographer was up with Roland, and so I'm on the ground with my big mouth. And as I'm watching them up there in the jack, the head of the Historical Society's library comes by, and I ask him, well, who are all these other people on the murals, especially those murals that are at the airport? There's 14 industrial murals that are there. He says, we have no idea, we'll never know, it's been 80 years, nobody will ever figure it out. Well, that was the wrong thing to say to me, because I was just, thinking, well, this is now the gauntlet has been thrown and the challenge is issued, and so later that day, off we go. Glenn Hartong and myself, we went to the airport to get better photos of the murals and then to get the heck out of the office as well, which was a good thing. And so, as I'm sure you know, that there are two concourses at the airport that are closed to traffic. There's only one concourse that's open. And so, of the 14 industrial murals that are over there, only 5 of them are visible to anybody going in and out. So we had to get a special permission to get over there. Luckily, the head of public relations for the airport at the time was a gentleman by the name of Brian Gregg, who used to work at the Enquirer. And so he knew us and we knew him, and away we went. And Brian Gregg is from Chicago, by the way, so he talks like this, And so he's getting his FAA badges out to swipe them so we can get in. And he says, hey, by the way, you're the second guys that have been here this week. And I said, really? I said, who was the first guy? He says, the mayor. And I'm thinking, the mayor of Hebron came back to look at these? No, the mayor of Cincinnati, he wanted to see the murals. I said, well, what does he want to see the murals for? Oh, we got to wreck these concourses and you got to get them moved. Ding, 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 ding. So that's how we broke that story in April of last year. That those murals are endangered once again. I should say the first time, and before I get too far ahead of myself, back in 1932, even before the terminal opened, they were endangered. There was a cost-cutting move afoot. Value engineering was setting in, as it did with Paul Brown Stadium. I think that's the direction of Paul Brown Stadium. And a not-so-great American ballpark, as I like to call it. And they needed to cut costs, and they wanted to cut costs at Union Terminal. And so it was proposed to not put in the murals. Just paint the walls and be done with it. Murals cost $63,000 to build and install, and another $21,000 went to Winald Rice, the artist. And they figured, well, we could save that kind of money. Even though there were 2 murals already in the building. They wanted to rip them out. Well, this didn't sit well with Henry Matson Waite, who was the chief engineer of the project. He liked those murals, and he thought that they were stunning works of art, brilliant decorations, he called them. And so I have seen the minutes of the meetings of the Union Terminal Company, wherein it's proposed by the several railroads that were owning the building at the time that they wanted these murals gone. They didn't want to spend the money, get them out. And the only response that's in the minutes and the secretary recorded that Colonel Waite said no. That was it. So he saved them the first time in 1932, even before the building movement. So, of course, we all know that they were endangered again when the concourse was foolishly wrecked. And so then the 14 of those murals were moved to the airport. There were a total of 19 murals in the building, in the concourse. 16 industrial murals, 2 of which are still at the museum center. They're downstairs now. They're the 2 murals dedicated to Rookwood pottery. I was hoping that would just show up on cue mystically, but it didn't. Anyway, and then, excuse me, there's an arriving train and departing trains. Those murals were also still there, and they flank the entrance to the historical library. There was one mural that did not make it, the largest of the murals, and that was a map mural that was at the end of the concourse, the western end of the concourse. Was 16 feet tall and 70 feet wide and weighed about 20 tons. And when they were destroying the concourse, they just backed a backhoe into it and wrecked it because they didn't want to save it. They could have saved it and pieced it, just as they saved the industrial murals, but they didn't. And so then there are now 5 murals that you can still see. The Alton whiteboard mural has the ink pouring into the buckets. The Newport, it's an Andrews rolling mill, Steve. I'm not there yet, Steve. I'll give you a cue. Philip Carey, the shingle making company. Baldwin Piano, those 2 guys making Baldwins, and the Merrill Drug Company. That was just up there. So we were then on a dual mission to save the murals once more and to find out who are those guys, who are the 35 men on the industrial murals. And they are, ladies, I'm sorry to tell you, but they're all men on the industrial murals. There are women in the murals of the Rotunda, but on the industrial murals, they were all men. There was a woman in one of the source photos, but she didn't make the cut. Wendell Rice, he took source photos. He went to these different factories in November of 1931 and took photos of the workers. Sometimes he would take 2 photos and lay one over the other, and whoever got laid over didn't make the cut. So there was a nice lady who was standing on top of a printing press at U.S. playing card. She didn't make the cut. So thus, all men. I should say that, as we look at these photos, I should issue a warning that none of these men are wearing any kind of OSHA-approved gear. You don't see any, they are wearing boots, but they're not wearing gloves. This guy has no shirt on, and it's about 120 degrees in the Cincinnati Milling Machine's foundry, which is very, very interesting. And this guy, by the way, with his back to us, that is a gentleman by the name of Ione Kincaid. He was an actor, and Wendell Rice was fascinated by Kincaid's back. As you saw, he had pretty broad shoulders. And so Kincaid shows up a lot of times. He even shows up. He's even on my tie. I've got a Union Terminal tie here. And, he's in several other murals that are in the rotunda. He's like Ione Kincaid's back, so you'll see his back in several spots. But it's fascinating that there are no OSHA-approved garments that these men are wearing, and they still survived. I don't know how that happened. And you also look at it too. I should warn you that there will be signs of perspiration. These guys are sweating, and that's the essence of all these, is that they are a celebration of hard work, of good work, honest work. And so we put out a plea for help to identify these gentlemen. And I have to say that we have received over 10,000 responses. Some of them were, "You are crazy," but there were, which I hear a lot, at home too, as a matter of fact. But there were 2,809 responses, honest to God responses from people with clues. And they were, as you are, historically inclined. and they respected history and honored it, and they had thoughts and clues about these different people. And some of them were how shall I say this, perpetual wild goose chases. Some of them were cases of mistaken identity. As I said, there are 35 men on the murals. We received, and as I said, 2,809 responses recommending 92 different people. So, in this game of musical chairs, somebody was going to be left out at the end of the day, unfortunately. So I had to break the news to some folks that that wasn't their Uncle Ned up there on the mural. Can we do the P&G mural? Yes. This is my humble assistant, Steve, who knows way more than I do about these kind of things. As I said, I was just going to pass out photos. There's 3 men. I'll do a dance. Okay. There are 3 men on the P&G mural, and they are a crew. They are literally a crew, and they were a stacking crew. And when the bars came out, they had just freshly cut the bars of ivory soap. This 3-man crew did what needed to be done to stack them so they cooled. And there they are. And what's interesting to note is that there's no identifying characteristics that these are bars of ivory soap. There's no P&G logo. There's no sign. There was never any sign anywhere at Union Terminal as to even what these industries represented. It wasn't necessarily the P&G mural. It was in Wendell Rice's mind and world, it was the soap it represented the industry of soap manufacturing. And of course, nobody's name was ever listed. So we found out who they were. And I should kudos. I have to go right now to the person who I mentioned first, and that would be my wife Debbie, who is a genealogical record searcher and history researcher. And she poured through draft notices and Social Security records and war records and city directories and all the wonderful things that you do when you're trying to track somebody down, just to make sure that these folks were who they said they were. And one of the memories I cherish is the man in the middle. As you can see, his back is to us, and you can see his sort of like his worker overalls there. And I got an email from one woman who said that is my grandfather. I'd recognize his rear end anywhere. Which I found to be very interesting, and we also found that she was wrong. That's not her grandfather's rear end. Now, the thing about these murals that everybody sees something of their own family or someone. For example, you don't have to switch to this, Steve, but there's on the Cons mural where the man is cutting it's a side of pork, and he's cutting it for hams to be sent down to the ham curing room. A woman called me up and said the saw, the electric saw that's cutting that, was made at her grandfather's plant, and she would go down there for train rides and just look at that saw. So there's a connection there, you know. She didn't think that any of these men were her relatives. By golly, that saw was a relative. So you find things out. It's amazing what you find out. And the man on the far left, you just barely make out his face, and he's got the bill with his cap. And that man is Hayden Williams Sr. And he lived within walking distance of P&G's Ivorydale plant. And after work one day, when in 1931 Wendell Rice was there taking those men's picture, they all 3 came home and after work and had a beer. And they talked about this strange guy, who would want to take our picture while we're stacking soap, for gosh sakes. They were just amazed. And the reason why I know that is because his son, Hayden Williams Jr., told me about that. He was alive. He was there that day when those 3 men walked in the door and talked about what's going on here and why was this guy taking our picture? Well, they found out, and of course he did too. And Hayden Williams Jr. is a spitting image of his dad. His son told me later that the more I look at my dad, the more he's the man in the mural. Because as you get older, your face gets a little thinner and everything, and he became he became the man in the mural. And I have to say that I had a wonderful, wonderful chat with him, and his recall was vivid. The men drank burger beer, by the way. If you remember that. And so I was finished talking with him, and he said, "Can I tell you one more thing?" Well, listen, to a guy like me, that's next to saying I love you. Right? So I said, "Well, sure you can." And he said, "I want to tell you that I had lunch with your dad every Wednesday for 15 years. And I just, this was just sort of floored me, And so he proceeded to tell me that, and I can remember my dad, he's sitting at the kitchen table, and across from my dad, of course, at our kitchen table, you had to tell stories about what you did. There was no, you weren't going to get off easy and just fill your mouth full of my mom's wonderful food and out the door. So you had to tell what was going on. So my dad, I can remember him on Wednesdays, he would often say, "I had lunch with Hay." Well, I always, as a little kid, was thinking, who or what is Hay? Well, it was Hayden Williams Jr. is what he had lunch with. Hayden Williams Jr. was, they had an elaborate, at the time, photo studio at Procter & Gamble, because unlike the digital age that we just, you just shoot pictures with this, they had an elaborately documented work if they were working on a new milling machine or a new roller to roll out soap. And so they would document that with all these photos, and they would photograph workers and everything too. So my dad was in research and development, so he had these meetings with Hay every Wednesday for 15 years. And it was fascinating to hear him talk about, it's interesting to hear someone tell you after your dad's been gone how proud he was of you. Makes me verklempt to talk about it. But this was the first, by the way, this was the first mural that we identified the workers. And this is the first one we published in late April of last year. And it was, as things are in corporate worlds, as you can well imagine, we have, there's all sorts of give and take you have to do, and negotiating and beating people on the head. And one of the editors didn't want to do PNG. So everybody knows PNG. And I said, well, that would be the obvious one to do then, to catch people's imagination. And we've got all these thousands of responses. So we did. And I persevered because I'm that kind of guy. And we ran it. And I was very glad that we did, because a week after we ran it, I got a call from Hayden Williams Jr.'s son. His dad had passed away. He was at home. He had just finished playing around the golf. He got out of the car. He sat down. He said to his wife, "I'm just going to sit here. And I'm going to enjoy this glass of milk." And he was gone. So we would have not had that story had we not talked to him at that time. Had he not been able to tell me one more thing, I'm telling you, the stories I have heard about these it's just amazing, and it reminds me too that this is this is Mayberry, and we're all connected, and it doesn't. You don't have to do 6 steps of separation to find these people. It's fascinating to me. Can we do the Alton Weiborg, which still glitters beautifully, by the way, at the airport, and with its ink as it seems to pour out into the bucket. What's fascinating about these murals is these were not podunk businesses that they featured. P&G, of course, was internationally known, but so was Alton Weiborg. Alton Weiborg was the world's largest manufacturer of printing ink. And they had offices in Paris and Brussels and Rome and London, as well as here in Cincinnati. And this is an ink grinder, and it's a 3-roller ink grinder, I've been told, by those who know these kind of things. And that man is Oscar Kampf, is his name. And he's a former vaudevillian. He was on stage with Jimmy Durante. He was friends with Jimmy Durante. When Jimmy Durante came into Cincinnati, he would call up Oscar and they would go tilt a few. And the reason I found out about this, and as I say, we are living in Mayberry, is because when we launched this project, I went to get a haircut. And the man who cuts my hair, and obviously he has sharp implements, and so you have to listen to people when they want to tell you something when you're cutting your hair. He said, I know who the guy is in that mural. I said, really? He says, yeah, it's my grandfather. He said, I have a whole scrapbook about him. And indeed he did. He had the source photo He had the photo of his grandfather, and that's old Oscar there. And he took this job. His wife said, they had just had a child, and he took this job because his wife said, you need regular work, and working in the vaudeville circuit is not going to cut it. So he got a job as an ink grinder at Alt and Wyborg. As I said, the world's largest manufacturer of printing inks. And at one time they had a client in Paris who they asked if he would do a poster for them, and you can find that poster in the Cincinnati Art Museum. There's Toulouse-Lautrec, and there's a beautiful poster that he did for Alton Wyborg, and for the rest of his life he got free ink from Alton Wyborg. There's a document of that at the Historical Society's library. There's old Oscar. And so many of these men, too, once again, he's not wearing gloves, he doesn't have any mask. He does have glasses, but those were his because he was nearsighted. It's fascinating. Let's go across the river to Andrew Steele, Newport Rolling Mills. This mural was one of the ones that I was always fascinated by. You could go down to the terminal, and I'm always fascinated by everything, and fascinated by all these murals. But this one, you could almost feel the heat coming on. It's fascinating as you see this red-hot sheet of steel that's coming off the rollers. And this is of course eventually became Newport Steel. In 1931, it was Andrew Steele's Newport Rolling Mill, and they were rolling these sheets of steel. I can feel the temperature rising. Here it is, red-hot sheets of steel. Now the one man on the far right you can't see, but you can see the man on the left. And those men are called matchers. Yes. And they flip this sheet of steel back and forth to cool it. And then they put it it's an outline on the floor, and so it matches that outline. And then they stack them. But it has to be has to have cooled. The red has to have turned to a certain color. Otherwise, as they say, they become stickers, and the sheets of steel stick. And then they catch all sorts of heck because then they have to remelt it. But they flip that back where they have those huge long tongs, and the man in the center is called a catcher. He's catching the sheet of steel off the rollers. You can see the two gold rollers there. Take my glasses off to read my own writing here. Cray Wagoner is the matcher on the left, and the man in the center, the catcher, is James Wiles, who was ticked off. He loved to go to see himself on that mural, but he always told his granddaughter that he was ticked off because they put a patch on his right pant leg, and he said I was always proud of what I wore. And he says if I had a tear in my jeans, I never went to work with them. They stayed at home. So he says also if you had a patch, you'll wind up getting sparks coming through your pants, and he didn't want that. The man who's only you see that'd be his left hand. That is a man by the name of William Wintersall. And if anyone's a fan of The Young and the Restless, his son, William Wintersall, starred on that for years. And I got a really nice note from him about that. His dad, his father, he said, I remember my father coming home to our 3-room Newport cottage following 8 or more hours of slinging red-hot steel, and being so drained he could barely make it up the few steps leading to the front room. Still, on the next day, no matter how tired he felt, he went back to work. That's what all this is all about, too, the celebration of work. That's another thing that's very interesting about these murals is that so often today we think of things at play. You go to amusement parks, and you go to the ball game, and you go here, there, and everywhere to have fun. Well, these guys may have enjoyed their work, but working in a room that was 120 degrees year-round was not a treat. I got a very nice letter from a man named Bill Livingston, who worked at this is roller number 3, by the way. They numbered their rollers at the plant, and he worked at number 3. And he said that said that it routinely got to 120 degrees. And he said, I eventually found work at another place called Procter & Gamble. And he said, I went from hell to heaven as far as temperature goes. He says, because the plant where he was working was air-cooled. So he didn't have to worry about 120 degrees. And then he drops this bomb on me. I'm reading this very nice handwritten note, and it's very late at night, and I only got one light on in the kitchen, and I was reading the day's mail, and at the bottom he says, and the man who hired me was your dad. And then he proceeds to say that because of my dad hiring him, and he said, I came to work at Procter & Gamble sight unseen, and he said, I didn't even go through the application process. I came in the back door, and he says, my dad was running a machine shop at the time. And he said, I told him where I worked, and my dad says, you know how to run a lathe? He says, yes. He says, well, show me what you got. See, Radels come from a long line of not standing on principles. I don't follow orders very well either. These calls, and these emails, and these letters came from everywhere. They went as far west as Samoa, because I got a letter from a man who lives there who knew about the murals and had some information about them. And we went as far east as Paris. Let's go to Paris with WLW mural. Okay, so. First, I received a letter from a woman who lives in Westwood. She'd grown up in Clifton. And she says, I know who the man is at the piano. She says, we live next door to him in Clifton, and his name is, he's great name, Virginio Marucci. That's a nice name, you know. And so she says, and his daughter's still alive, and she lives in Paris, Nina Marucci. So, the wonders of the internet, you can, as a former president once said, you can do the Google, and lo and behold, in the Paris phone book, which is online, there she was listed, Nina Marucci. So one spring, it was an afternoon here, it was going on dusk there in Paris, and further in dusk. I was called her around, I guess, noon, so it was around, 8 hours difference. And you could hear church bells. She answered the phone, and it was at one of those Paris places where you can imagine with those floor-to-ceiling windows, and you could hear church bells ringing in the background as she was talking to me. And I had this incredible conversation with Nina Marucci, and she told me how her dad got to be at the piano. Virginio Marucci was the orchestra leader at WLW when they had bands and orchestras, and combos and everything. And he played violin. He also dabbled at piano, as in the day when if you were an orchestra leader you had to know how to write arrangements, and so he did. So he was there when Vinyl Rice was there with the photographer, and they were taking pictures. And Vinyl Rice had picked out one of the pianists, to take a picture. And he sat him down at the piano, and all of a sudden Rice has his hands on his hips, and then he's going like this, and then he rolls his eyes, and then he realized the man had a bald spot right in the back, and so it was putting up a glare. And even though, Rice is an artist, for gosh sakes, he could have just, painted out the glare, but he's a purist too. He did not want that glare in that source photo. So he looks over, and there's this guy with this beautiful head of hair, very dark, slick back hair, full head of hair, and he says, "You play piano?" He goes, "Yeah, I sure do." He says, "Take a seat." And that's how Virginio Marucci of Clifton Avenue finally got on the mural. And he took his daughter there many times, and there she was in Paris. She was in her 90s when I talked to her, and she just passed away last week, as a matter of fact. But it was a wonderful chat about. She remembered, in great detail, him taking her down to the Union Terminal and talking about that piano. It's a Baldwin piano, by the way. In the source photos, you can clearly see Baldwin spelled out, but in this, it's nameless, it's ageless, it's timeless. It's just Virginio Marucci at the keyboard and Charlie Butler at the controls. And that's by the way, that's a composite of two photos, and the line separating the studio from the control panel is is the improvisation of Myrtle Rice. He took the two photos, stuck them together, and put that wall up there. So those are some of the stories that I have heard about these murals, and I am a very, very lucky boy to have been able to work on and find out who these 35 guys are, and come to have numerous thoughts about them. You know, we're still in the process of saving the murals one more time. And by 2015, those concourses have to be wrecked at the airport for parking, and those murals need a new home. And it could cost between $2 and $5 million to move them. Now, I've told my wife, and I've gone on record so she knows this, she also knows how crazy I am, but I said if we win the lottery, we could rebuild the concourse at Eden Terminal. It would only cost $20 million to rebuild it. I've already checked that out. It cost $1 million to build it in 1933, so it'd be $20 million in today's money. We could rebuild it, move them all back, and be done with it. And then they're saved forever. We could make it a LED lit and a green building and all that other stuff and get all sorts of tax credits. And she just goes, "Are you crazy?" But, you know, you never know. You never know. So I keep on buying the tickets. But as I buy these tickets, I still marvel at these murals. They are definitely works of art. They are works of genius in that Myrtle Rice was able to capture these men and this work and be it a part of these men. Now we know exactly who the 35 men are, but we also know who they represent. And they represent anybody who has done a hard day's work, anybody who has taken pride in their work, and so they represent us all. So thank you very much. I guess I'm free to entertain any questions so I don't have to go back to work sooner.
So where do we stand, Cliff, on the collection of money for the next restoration?
Well, as I understand, the money is being raised by the Cincinnati Historic Preservation Association, and they're at a whopping total of $32,000, and so they need between $2 and $5 million. So I better win that lottery sooner than later. And we are facing a deadline of 2015 where the concourses have to be wrecked, and so time is wasting. There is a commission that was formed by the previous mayor of Cincinnati, Mark Mallory. The new mayor, I'm having a talk with him tomorrow at 11:15 to find out what's going on. So stay tuned to the Enquirer. Yes, sir.
The justification that I understand for tearing down the concourse was because of the piggybacks that were going through there now. I assume I had heard after that after the demo, after 2 years or something, that they were no longer using that marshalling yard, and that it was all pretty much done for nothing.
It was done for naught, you're correct. Yes, it was one of the great architectural tragedy of I always like to say that this area leads a league in paying lip service to historic preservation, but we have a pretty poor record when you think of the great buildings that have fallen. And hats off for you guys for doing what you're doing with these buildings here and paying attention and marking them with your markers too. It was sad too because it would only cost $500,000 to lower the tracks where they needed to put the piggyback lines if they needed them, but they didn't do that. They weren't going to spend the money. And you know, the Southern Railroad, that's not pocket change. That's just lint in their pocket, $500,000. They're used to, you know, railroads lower tracks all the time. It's their line of work. That's what they do. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
When you had your conversations with all these people like Hayden Jr., did you tape record those?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. We had lucky too because some folks came down to the office unannounced, and luckily Glenn Hartong was there, and he brought his video camera. There was the man on the, okay, now I'm drawing a blank. Okay, the American oak leather mural where the guy's cutting. He's got actually it's called a belly stretcher, the machine that he's doing to stretch the hide, and it's called a belly stretcher for two reasons. One, he's stretching the belly hide of the animal, but also your belly is against the board where you work. And the grandson of that man came down unannounced with pictures. And he was so proud to talk about his grandfather, who was on that mural. And he had tales to tell about his grandfather lived on what is now Martin Luther King Drive. It was Dick Smith at the time, and we measured it. It was a 5-mile walk one way to work. And he walked. He didn't have a car, and he walked that distance. And he remembered him coming home, and he would have this thick. He was born in Hungary, and he made it this. He says coffee. He said that he made so thick and so strong. He said you like cut it with a scissors when he poured it out of the pot. But he would talk about that. This man never ever saw his image at Union Terminal. He said, I got to go to work, and I'll come back. And he walked, and he would stop at along his path was Crosley Field at the time, and he would stop and see games there. It wasn't like he didn't enjoy things, but he always told his grandson, look, I don't have any money for a train ride. I would feel funny going into that terminal with all those people and not having a ticket to ride somewhere. So that was fascinating too. The great humbleness of these men. And like I said, there's 3 men from P&G. They could not figure out for the life of them why this man came in to take their picture. And then why would he put us up on a mural? That's, by the way, 20 feet by 20 feet and only 8 inches thick. And it's fascinating, the process to see that. And you can see you get close to the murals that are at the airport, you can see the process that was done where they spread out the mortar, and then the sheets of the tile mosaic, and the tiles are about as big as my thumbnail, my small pinky fingernail, and they were attached to, they were glued on to brown paper, craft paper, and then they would spread out the mortar and they would squish it onto the mortar and wait an hour and then peel off the paper, and that's how it was made. And then the larger pass of the mortar that they would tint by hand, and so it's a fascinating process, very painstaking, and there's very few people in the world who do that to this day. Any other questions?
Has there been a book published, or will be a book published of all this information?
Well, I'd like you to send that question to Carolyn Washburn of the Cincinnati Enquirer, please. We are advocating that be done, because we did a 10-page special section to her credit. It ran on December 28th of last year. There was no advertising in this section. In this day and age, you don't run special sections with no advertising, but we did. And to her credit, she marshaled that to get that done. But we would like to do, Glenn Hartong and myself would like to do a book as well on these murals.
To add the stories that you've told us that are important.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And we have videos that we've done with, for example, like the lady asked that question. We have videos that we did with the people who came down to the office too. So we could do a book and have a disc inside too. We could be 21st century. Yes, ma'am.
Has anyone thought of contacting the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for funds?
Well, no, but I have now. Thank you very much.
One inroad, our director here at the library has an inroad with the...
Really?
Yes.
Time to get the reporter's notebook. Bear with me while I do that before I forget. Okay. I don't want to keep you long. It's a nice chilly evening. It's a beautiful night to have some hot cocoa. But if there's any more questions, if not, yes, ma'am.
Where are the murals going if they go?
They have explored taking them, bringing them back. And here's the reason why they can bring them back to Cincinnati. When the murals were moved in 1974, there's a man who's still alive who was on the Save the Murals committee, and he had a clause written in that if they ever have to be moved, the city of Cincinnati gets first right of refusal. And so there is a corner, the southwestern corner of the convention center, as you go in the main doors, there's a very large hallway on the south side, and to the southwestern corner there's just sheets, glass windows, and so all you'd have to do is unbolt the frames and slide them in. They are portable, even though they've been inspected. The firm that moved the Tyler Davidson fountain has inspected the murals and found them to be roadworthy, even though they're 80 years old and they have some cracks. The cracks are from when the plaster dried, the mortar, not plaster, it's mortar. The mortar dried in 1933. They're not stress fractures, it's just drying cracks. So they're in good shape. They're pretty good for their age. Yes, ma'am.
If they can't be saved, has there any thought been given to, taking videos of them? I'm sure they're already taking the videos of them, and then just painting them onto the walls? Taking the picture and just recreating a picture with just paint or something?
Well, that would be difficult. See, one of the wonderful things about these murals is because they're so durable, and that they're you couldn't put them outside. They would freeze and thaw around this area, would destroy them. But because that was talked about, maybe putting them at Smale Park down on the riverfront, and that wouldn't work because they'd be exposed to the elements. But they are durable, and they sure look good. I mean, what's fascinating to think about is with the Alton whiteboard mural is that the way these little pieces of glass were tilted to catch the light to make it appear like the ink is literally pouring into the buckets. And they did it without computers. These guys are looking at these, and there's several photos that we've found where they have buckets of these tile, and they're looking at them and they're figuring out, okay, that's one. And so they stick it on this sticky paper, brown paper, and then they hold it up to the light and figure, okay, that works. And they only did like sections, one by 1 foot sections at a time too. So it was quite tedious work, but these guys knew what they were doing. And it was done, by the way, at the Ravenna Studios in New York, two sites, Ravenna Studios in New York and in Berlin. And Vinyl Rice hated the work that came from Berlin. He was no fan of the Nazis, and as you know, by that time, the Nazis were in power, and he didn't care for their work. And he said he could tell, Rice was German as well, he said you could tell where the Germans messed up and where the Americans were more exacting with their work. So there you go.
Are there any more like murals by the same company? Murals by the same company?
Yes, Ravenna did numerous works. They did work in a restaurant called Longchamps in Washington, D.C., and Longchamps in New York City. Both those restaurants are out of business, but the murals still stand in the buildings that they exist. Longchamps in D.C. is on Pennsylvania Avenue, is just down from the Willard Hotel. I don't know where the one is in New York City. Yes?
Around the interior of the rotunda, there's other murals or something like that.
Yes, there's the same murals. Those are. Pardon me?
Did Rice do those?
Yes, he did all the Mosaic murals. There are linoleum murals that were done by Pierre Radel in off the side by the dining room, by restaurants, and the phone booth. But all the Mosaic murals are all Rice's work, and he was paid a whopping $21,000 to do them, which is pretty good change in 1930s.
Were these murals that we're talking about now, were they up on the walls?
Yes, the ones we're talking about, the industrial murals, were in the concourse. That was where the IMAX theater is today.
Yes.
So the concourse was back behind there, and it was a huge, huge building. As I said, 450 feet long, 80 feet wide. 36 feet tall. Make a nice, it would be incredible display space for the museum center if it were still standing. And it was glorious in that it had all this natural lighting, all these windows on the sides, and they played natural light would play off of the murals, and they literally sparkled. And then they had these huge sconces on the sides too during the evening that were lit. Those are all gone, by the way. Those were all destroyed. There are pieces, by the way, pieces of the map mural, about 4 pounds worth of something that weighed 20 tons. And the reason why they exist is because the members of the Cincinnati Railroad Club were dumpster divers, and they went after when they were wrecking it, and they paid the bulldozer drivers and the backhoe guys to take a break, and they would dumpster dive and save things. It was a wholesale destruction of works of art, which the city and the railroad company should be pretty ashamed of. Yes, sir.
Yes, when I was a kid, I remember that concourse and that map of the United States. What I was shocked to find out was those clocks weren't clocks. They were mosaics.
Exactly.
They were fixed in time.
They were fixed in time.
Yeah,
yes.
And I always thought they were clocks until, when I got close to it.
Yeah. They were about yay big. And of course there's a railroad station, so they wanted to mark the time. So they did, but they weren't functioning clocks. It might have been part of the cost-saving measure. Maybe they did it that way. I don't know. But the Winold Rice's original painting for that map mural has come home. It's back at the terminal. When we launched this series of stories, a man in New York read online, one of the wonders of online newspapers, and he donated the painting to the museum center. And it's another example of this being Mayberry, in that he wanted to donate that painting to Cornell University. And so they going through proper channels and talks to the president of the university, and they get the art museum curator involved in this. And she takes one look at it, and she says, well, you have to donate it to Cincinnati. And of course her boss was sort of, what are you doing here? She goes, my name's Janet Averill, and she's of Averil's Meats downtown on Court Street. And she says, I went out of that terminal many, many times, and I saw that map mural, and this painting belongs in Cincinnati, not Cornell University. So, lo and behold, there it is. And think about it, if Janet Averill wasn't there that day and some other curator was, the painting might be hanging in Cornell, in Ithaca, New York, but it's here, and it's beautifully hung on the southern wing of the terminal when you go in. I highly recommend seeing it. There have also been, since we started our story, other donations of the murals that are in what they call the checking lobby as you go back toward the IMAX Theater. There's murals on the sides that represent, they show the terminal as it was being built with the city manager and the mayor and the head of the Union Terminal Company. And then on the north side is the terminal as it was finished, and they have the mayor and the city manager and the head of the terminal company who were there in 1933. And the paintings for those murals have also found their way back to the terminal. I've always been this kind of guy, that people are throwing stuff away, and I'm walking down the street, I'm reaching for the garbage can, and I'm saving my teddy bear and all this kind of stuff. So it's a lifelong thing. Well, I thank you very much. Unless there are any other questions, I will bid you adieu.